Hey there, and welcome to Finlos Lives, and we're going to try the unscripted thing again. So, to get started with this episode, earlier in the week, it might have been Monday, maybe Tuesday, the president's buffoon son, Hunter Biden, was in the news yet again, and I'm going to do my best to stay politics free, at least like actual politics, because whatever your policies are, I have very strong opinions and I'd rather not fight with anybody. So I'm just talking about the character of people as much as anything right now. But this unfortunate guy, I don't feel bad for him per se, because he's just some rich white guy who gets to, live a fairly decadent life and live off the coattails of his father. And so, I don't feel bad for him necessarily. I do think, however, that he is being put out there a lot more than is appropriate because of who he is, just because he is Biden's son. And something that just drives me crazy about how this gets covered in the news, when reporters refer to him as just Hunter. Like, Hunter said this, or Hunter did that. Okay, I get it. He is of the same name as the President Biden, but still, he's not your personal friend. And even if he is, this is the news. We refer to people generally by their last names or by their formal names, or at least by their full names, Hunter Biden or the younger Biden or whatever. But just don't call him Hunter. It makes you sound kind of dumb. But he has been subpoenaed to testify in Congress about how he was peddling on his father's name and all of these supposed shenanigans. I don't really care. Doesn't matter. The point of what I'm talking about is the buffoon that he is, because he is one, but he actually said something right, and something that I have been screaming out loud over the past forever as I think about politics and as we as a people discuss politics. As things change, as our perspectives on what individual freedoms and how people live their lives change, as we understand that our existences are here in a vast array of experiences, and your own sense of aesthetics or your own sense of appropriateness or your own sense of morality aside, it's none of your fucking business. Okay? So, back to Mr. Biden, the younger Biden, Hunter Biden, who said something very much relating specifically to himself. But he has a platform that most of us don't, which is fame and notoriety. And I'm paraphrasing this phrase because he said it, couched amongst a much more complicated situation, I guess we'll say. But the essence is as the Republican House members are subpoenaing him to testify in a closed committee meeting, which means that the public won't get to hear whatever it is he has to say or what the questions are. I think more importantly, his response is, what are you afraid of? What do you have to hide from the public? What are you afraid of? And cool, I agree with him. What are you afraid of? But I think that is the message that every person should be asking of their elected officials across the political spectrum when there is some sort of pause or halt or barrier or obstruction put up for individual liberty, whether it be gender identity or sexuality or a woman's right to decide what she does with her body, or personal recreational drug usage, whatever your thoughts are. when it comes to how people live their lives and how we regulate those people's existences and how they are finding ways to live in this really complicated and difficult world and figure out who they are and who we are and who I am, and you're trying to tell me, you're trying to tell us what we can or can't or should or shouldn't do, what are you afraid of? If I'm a teacher in a classroom and one of my students says to me, "Hey, Mr. F, I know what it says on my record, but I don't identify with that name or that gender. Please, this is who I am." And some politician wants to tell me no, that's undermining or that's inappropriate or it's immoral. Or if there's a teacher who is in a, whatever you want to call it, non-traditional romantic partnership, they're gay or they're queer or whatever they identify as, and they want to put a picture of their partner on their desk and that makes you uncomfortable, that's your fault. What are you afraid of? So thank you, Hunter Biden, for saying that out loud. And I'm not echoing your platform because, dude, you're dumb and you make some bad choices. And I appreciate that you're trying to atone and that you're trying to live up to them, to do right by them. But that was at least a decent thing to ask. So just remember, ask your elected officials, what are you afraid of? That should be a rallying cry for all of us. What are you afraid of? The other thing that really stuck out to me this week is not as serious or deep as that, but something that I still find interesting as it relates to pop culture and literature. The third and probably final trailer for the Denis Villeneuve Dune sequel, so Dune Part 2, was released last Sunday, maybe? Sunday or Monday? And there's two things that I want to address with this. First, I love Dune, and this is something that I grapple with. It's not that deep, I get it, but I do grapple with it because it's important that we recognize that the people who create content and the media that we consume, whether they're books, movies, video games, whatever, they are individuals, and there are times when we can and can't separate art from creator. Frank Herbert, the creator of the Dune world, had some problematic takes, and that sucks. And I think that he created some very interesting fictional stories that really accurately and really interestingly grapple with some of the more complex aspects of politics and religion and how those two things intersect with each other. So I think that there is value there. And I think that that is a very complicated and nuanced conversation that we should be constantly having with ourselves. How do we grapple with the complexities of creators and their art when sometimes the art doesn't necessarily match the person who makes it? So, another example would be Orson Scott Card. Growing up, loved the Ender's Game series, and then I became an adult and realized, oh my god, this guy is awful. And I don't hold as much love for the Ender's Game series anymore because of that, and because of just the writing generally got diminishing returns, we'll say. But, as we look to our musicians and our creators as humans and as complex people, and as we understand that the things that we consume are complicated, how do we reconcile those differences? Sometimes we can't. There are creators who they go too far, and we're going to not participate with them anymore, and we decide that with our dollars and with our activities. Anyways, back to Dune and back to the third trailer. The first thing that I want to say is, again, I love Dune, and I really enjoyed the first part of the Denis Villeneuve Dune movie. It's how I got this podcast started, was doing like a 3-part breakdown of both the movie and the books. If you want to listen to it, I think you should, because it's pretty cool. I mean, there are things that are not perfect. There are things that get left out. There are things that I think are just absolutely stunning and amazing about the works, about the films. The film, I should say, because I've only seen one of them. So something that got me really excited for this second part. And as somebody who has watched all versions of this film many, many, many times. Something that they've never been able to get right, and I'm going into the Dune talk here, so I'm sorry if you're bored by this. You're more than welcome to exit the conversation. But something that got me really excited was there's this moment. It's very, very, very quick towards the end of the trailer where you see the Fremen riding on the worms, and I think they finally succeeded in making the sandworms of Arrakis seem powerful and scary and have a sense of speed that I think has always been lacking in how do you visualize a giant creature that swims in sand? And it's kind of like one of those things where it's a hard thing to do to make it look realistic and making it not look silly, because that has looked silly in some of the prior films. But in this one very quick clip of the sand riders on the back of the worm, it just looked amazing. And that more than anything, I think, got me really excited. I think that what, as adaptations, Denis Villeneuve was trying to do that I really appreciate is it seems he's less trying to capture every single scene from the book and every line of dialogue from the book, and instead trying to capture the essence of what those books are doing. So that, in one sense, the Dune writers are one moment when these are not spoilers. I mean they are spoilers if you've never read the books or whatever, but the book is old. I don't care. Then the scene in the trailer where the worms they have broken through the shield wall around the city of Arrakeen, and you just see them diving into the sand, and you see how large they are in comparison to the Sardaukar and the Harkonnen troops on the battleground. It just looks amazing, and I can't wait to see that. So I think that sense of power, and there are moments in the trailer where you see just tens of thousands of people on screen when Paul is addressing the gathered Fremen, like that sense of grandeur and power. And there's like one line where the Chani, who's played by Zendaya, she says, and it's completely out of context, so who knows what's actually going on, but she says, this prophecy will enslave us. Like this idea of the intersection of religion and politics. I mean, wink, wink, given our current international political situation is going on right now, like that is a very, very powerful conversation that we should be having. And if we can use literature as sort of like the safe ground to talk about that intersection of religion and politics, like I'm all for that. And Frank Herbert did an amazing job with this book, and Villeneuve, I hope, is attempting to have that conversation. I did recently watch again the first part, and one thing that film, there's one scene where like I think captured one of the messages of the books, and so one of the overarching themes of all of this, of the whole series, is this idea of being able to see the future, of prescience, and how we all at one point or another wish that we could do this. We wish that we could see into the future so we can make good decisions. How that actually becomes a trap and locks us into a cycle of self-fulfillment and of boredom. Like that is a really powerful message. And the one scene that does it and talks about this, that I think captures this sort of desperation really well, is in part one, when Paul is in the still tent with his mother, and he like it's essentially a panic attack because he's really having one of his first most powerful visions, which is of the jihad. He sees himself becoming leader of the Fremen, and that they defeat the Emperor and the Sardaukar and unleashes this religious holy war on the known universe, conquering and killing trillions of people. And he understands that once you see it, it's like you can't unsee it. And if you one of the philosophical debates is, if you see the future, do you then create the future? Do you then lock yourself into that future? And so as Paul sees this, he realizes that then if I see it, and if I am truly an oracle, then that means that there's nothing to be done. And that moment of feeling trapped is really, really beautifully captured in that moment. I think that Timothée Chalamet, one of the things that he's often noted for is this sort of nonchalance that he carries in his roles, which I think is accurate. And I think sometimes that worked against him in his character of Paul. But in that moment, like, a lot of that sort of casualness that he is, and that confidence that he is known for was beautifully shed, and he really leaned into the panic of that moment. And so I'm hoping that with part 2 of Dune, it really leans into all of these intermingling themes of religion and politics, and how people have this tendency to constantly strive to look for messianic figures to lead us and to make decisions for us, but how these messiahs often then become tyrants. And I'm hoping that's really the heart of the book. I think you can lose so much of the specifics of the story, and if you have that aspect, I think that's what the cognate for real life is. I think that's what makes why I keep coming back to these stories, is that it really is an excellent filter and lens for sort of fictionalizing real world aspects of ecology and politics and religion and power and creativity and future vision, and of thinking ahead, and of considering how our actions really affect those who come after us. I think that's the power of these books. And so I have high hopes for that. And where I'll end this episode of Finlos Lives, as I'm talking about Dune, I've recently re-listened. Once I've read the books, I tend to like switch to audiobooks because I can do other things while I listen and not have to pay quite as much attention to them. But I just recently re-listened to the original Dune series on audiobook as I was, jogging or cooking or doing whatever, and they're just so good. And now I finished them, and so I've moved now into the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I just finished the first one, The Gunslinger, and I'm starting the drawing of the 3. And all of this to say that, books are such great friends. And Eva has been reading and finding companionship with this writer and activist who I don't know his name, so I'm sorry that I can't give that information. But it's a person who talks about how Eva's the expert on this, so I'm really botching this, but how we need to embody our feelings as much as we do our like to embody our emotions as much as we think about them in our minds. So that's really abstract, and I'm sorry, but one of the ways that he discusses this, and what I'm getting to, is the idea of the significance of non-romantic friendships, and how these relationships are so essential for co-regulation and the need to be able to not just rely upon a single person to bear the brunt and to bear the burden of all of that co-regulation, which ultimately leads to codependency, and how this person suggests having a minimum of 5 people outside of your primary romantic relationship that you can lean on. And immediately the thing becomes like, oh my God, how many people do I have in my life that I really would consider this type of friend? And is it 5? Is it less than 5? I don't know. So anyways, that what it does is it could make you feel a little lonely. I know that I got to feel a little lonely when I thought about that, because I don't really have those immediate 5 people all the time with whom I can co-regulate, with whom I can share some of the emotional hardships that we deal with on a daily basis. I love Eva, and she's amazing, and she's the best person that I can ever wish for to share these things, but it's not her responsibility all of the time to help me co-regulate as much as she's willing to do that. So I have been recently leaning a lot on these sort of companion stories. And there is a ton of research actually that backs this up, that we often choose to re-experience media that we're familiar with, novels, stories, TV shows, poetry, things that we're already familiar with, that we can anticipate what's going to happen, because it's like a person whose personalities we are familiar with, and it makes us feel like we're with a friend. It actually has the same emotional and psychological impact as hanging out with a friend is spending time with these characters. So if you are feeling lonely and you can't turn to those 5 people in your life to co-regulate with, it's okay to put on an audiobook or to watch that TV show that you've watched 100 times. I know for me it's like Babylon 5 or Battlestar Galactica, or Adventure Time or Steven Universe, any of these shows that we've seen many times over and over again. All the characters, all the lines, we know them all because they do feel like friends, and that's cool. And so Dune has been filling that role, and now Stephen King with The Dark Tower and Roland and his quartet. So that's where I'll leave you, and I hope that you have had a wonderful week. If you enjoyed what you heard this episode, I'd really appreciate if you share the podcast. You can reach out to me on social media if you have questions or comments or suggestions for future topics. You can email me, finlos@finloslives.com, or leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app on the website, finloslives.com. I look forward to our next conversation.